The Project Gutenberg ebook of Too Much Progress for Piperock. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. Title: Too Much Progress for Piperock. Author: W.C. Tuttle. Release date: February 28, 2024. Ebook number 73065. Language: English. Original publication: New York, The Ridgeway Company, 1922. Credits: Roger Frank and Sue Clark. Start of the Project Gutenberg ebook. Too Much Progress for Piperock. Too Much Progress for Piperock. Too Much Progress for Piperock by W.C. Tuttle, author of Law Rustlers, The Spark of Skeeter Bill, etc. I never seen anything like her before, not alive. One time I found a piece of an old-fashioned magazine, and there was a picture of a female in that, a female that some feller drawed, but I just figured that it was all imagination with him. I take one look at this live female and then I takes off my hat to the artist. She said she was an artist. What in anybody could find to draw in Yallerock County except guns was more than I could see. Me and Magpie Simpkins was down at Paradise, setting in Art Wheeler's stage, when she got on, headed for Piperock. Art got one look at her and then jackknifed his 4 horses in trying to turn around and go the wrong direction. Magpie Simpkins never took his eyes off her. Magpie's old enough to know better, but he didn't seem to. Art's eyes don't follow the road much, with the result that he runs a front wheel off Calamity Grade and danged near sends us all to our final destination. She said her name was Henrietta Harrison. Art pulls up for a breathing spell at Cottonwood Creek, and we stops in the shade of a tree. She looks at the big tree and then she says, "Under the greenwood tree who loves to lie with me, and tune his merry note unto the sweet bird's throat." "Me," says Magpie, "kinda foolish like." "You," snorts Art. "Tune your merry note." "Haw. Haw. Haw. You could lie, maybe you could," says Magpie, mean like. "But your wife wouldn't let ya." "Set down, you ancient he buzzards." I yelps. "Ain't you got no sense?" "I don't understand," says Henrietta. "Nobody does," says I, consoling her. "If we did, we'd know whether to lynch 'em or send 'em to the Loco Lodge, ma'am." "Magpie makes me tired," declares Art. "Any time he wants to tune his note, it's my note, Mr. Wheeler." "If I want to tune my own note, I was merely quoting Shakespeare," says the lady. "Gidap, Bronx," says Art Wheeler, and we rocked on into Piperock. I'll tell you right here and now, beauty ain't even skin deep in Piperock. We've got women folks, that is, some has, but nobody ever kidnapped any of 'em. If they belonged to me, I'd trust 'em with any man. There's Mrs. Wick Smith, who jars the hay scales to 275, and wheezes plentiful. Art Wheeler's better half tasted of life and found it sour, and never got the acid out of her system. Mrs. Testament Tilton looks upward for guidance in all matters except when it comes to flattering Testament's head with a skillet. When Mrs. Pete Gonnier is in sight, Pete's voice sinks 17 inches below a whisper. Somebody remarks one day that Pete's kinda henpecked. "Henpecked," says Pete. "Ostrich if there ain't nothin' bigger what wears feathers." Mrs. Steele, the wife of our legal light, is 6 feet 2 inches tall, and she's always oratin' about the sanctity of the home, whatever that is. One cinch, the prize never hands down any decisions in his own home. Mrs. Sam Holt goes through life worrying about somebody alienating the affections of old Sam, who can barely hear himself yell, and has to eat his spuds mashed or miss the taste of 'em. There's the Mudgett sisters, who must have been the originals of the first cartoon of Miss Democracy. Cupid would have to use a .30 to 30 if he went to work for them. Scattered around the range is a occasional female, but nothing that you'd bet your money on in a beauty contest. Annie Schmidt is cooking for the Triangle outfit, but the same don't seem to cause any of the other ranches to go short of help. Henrietta Harrison horns into Piperock. Piperock takes a deep breath. Bad news travels fast, and it ain't long before there's a need of another hitch rack in Piperock. Sam Holt runs the hotel, or thought he did, but Ma Holt got one look at Henrietta and shut up the book. "Every room is taken," says she. "Who by, Ma?" asks old Sam. "Me." "Ma'am," says Magpie, "I reckon mebbe Mrs. Smith will take a boarder." Wick said she would. Wick locked up his store and took the valise in one hand and Henrietta's elbow in the other, kinda rubbing Magpie and me out. We sat down on the sidewalk intending to speak unkindly to Wick when he came back, but Henrietta came back with him. Wick sets the valise down on the sidewalk. "Ma said she was goin' to have company, and won't have no room." "This summer?" asks Magpie. "I ain't no hand to argue," says Wick. Pete Gonnier comes over, and Magpie asks Pete about taking a boarder. "Why betcha," says Pete. "Pleasure's all mine." Mrs. Gonier'd be plumb tickled stiff. "Live all your life with us, ma'am." Pete almost stands on his head, bowing and scraping like a ground owl, but just then Mrs. Gonnier comes down the sidewalk, but Pete don't see her. "Pete," she snaps. "My," gasps Pete. The rope broke. Mrs. Gonnier looks at Henrietta and then at Pete. "I run out of horseshoes," says Pete. "I had to come to the store." Pete goes on into the store and Mrs. Gonnier follows him inside. "I must find a place to board," says Henrietta, kinda sad like. "Eatin' part's easy," says I, "but it begins to kinda look like you might have to hive up under that greenwood tree." "I'll take her in before I'll let her sleep under a tree," says Magpie. "You'll take her in," says I. "You mean, we'll take her in, don't ya? Half of that cabin is mine. It was my idea, Ike." Just then Testament Tilton and his wife drives into town. Testament is a sanctimonious-looking old pelican. He looks at Henrietta, and his lips move, but I know they don't move in prayer. "Miss Harrison needs a place to stay," explains Magpie. "Have you folks got any extra room?" "Brother Magpie, we have," says Testament. "We have? Where?" asks Mrs. Tilton. Testament turns and looks at her kinda queer like for a moment and then back at us. "That's the question," says Testament. "I thought we had room, but where is it?" "Well, get out of the wagon," says Mrs. Tilton, nudging Testament. "Me and you have got to do shoppin'." "I think it is an insult," says Henrietta. "I've half a notion to leave." "I've got a good notion to leave with ya," says Magpie. "Let's make it a trio," says I. "What are you insulted about?" asks Magpie. "I ain't so danged particular that I'd mention any one little thing. I came here to recuperate," sighs Henrietta. "I escaped from everyone and went to one country where they would never expect to find me, and I am not welcome, it seems. I thought I might find a new theme in the wild dances of Aboriginal tribes. That sort of thing is new and original, I think." "I think so too," nods Magpie. "They sure do dance wild around here. Often. Every time we can find somebody what can call a quadrille. Round dances don't go very good, 'cause there's always some woman accusin' her husband of huggin' some other man's wife. I don't mean civilized dances." Neither do I, agrees Magpie. Then cometh Muley Bowles, Chuck Warner, Telescope Tolliver and Henry Peck, the four disgraces of the Crossjay outfit. Muley, the poet, is too fat to work. Telescope, the tall thin tenor, is too proud to work. Chuck Warner wiggles his flexible ears, lies fluently to everyone, and proves an alibi every time J. Bird Whittaker, his boss, tries to make him work. Henry Peck has kind of a dumb way of going through life, and plays a banjo. They seize us and don't lose no time getting off their broncs and investigating. Muley takes a look at Henrietta and swallows real hard. Telescope stumbles over Chuck's foot and almost falls into her. "Will you introduce me?" asks Henrietta. "Well, says Magpie, "Miss Harrison, I makes ya used to Muley, Telescope, Chuck and Hen. They're just common or ordinary cowpunchers. Cowboys, meet Miss Harrison, a artist." "Me cha," says Telescope. "Mr. Simpkins misinformed ya, ma'am. My name is Tolliver, one of the Kentucky Tollivers, ma'am." "Oh," says she. "I'm named Bowles," wheezes Muley. "One of the Oklahoma Bowles. His pa was a famous man," says Chuck. "He'd a been greater, but the posse roped him just short of the state line. I'm named Warner, a name made great by some doctor who built a patent medicine." "Pleased to meet ya." "Speak up for yourself, Hen," urges Magpie. "Tell the lady about yourself." "I'm named Peck," says Hen. "I can't think of any smart thing to say today. I am Miss Harrison." "For a reason," says she, "I am incognito." "My," gasps Telescope. "Is that so? I used to know a family of that name. They was Italians or Mexicans. Good family though." "I detest a nom de plume," says she, smiling. "Me, too," agrees Muley. "I never had one, but the looks of one was a plenty for me." "The lady can't find a place to live," says Magpie. "Nobody is willin' to sleep her. They lets this soak in, and then Telescope says what's the matter with her. Nobody got any room. My trunks will be here tomorrow," says she. "Female drummer?" asks Hen. "I," says the lady, kinda dignified like. "I am an artist." "Oh yeah? Kinda like what, ma'am?" "Do you paint?" "I dance." "By cripes," grunts Muley. "We'll give a dance." I am an interpretive dancer," she explains. "Oh, yeah," nods Telescope. "I see. You're a kindly liar," says Chuck, "because you don't see nothin'." "Ma'am, I'm plumb ignorant of the word you used. Yer do nature dances, don't you know?" "Nature? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah," mimics Hen. "You see, just like Telescope did, Chuck. Really, I do not believe I can explain it to you," says she. "Unless you have seen one done, it is difficult for the lay mind to grasp. That's a word I been tryin' to get for years," says Magpie. "Every time I've looked at this Crossjay bunch I've tried to think of a word to describe their mentality. I thanks ya for the word lay mind, ma'am. Them four snake hunters sure have that kinda minds." "It ain't the hoochie," begins Hen. "It ain't," yelps Telescope. "The lady never said nothin' about muscles." "Henry, your horns are gettin' too long." "Clip 'em, cowboy," challenges Hen. "Start clippin' and see which one of us gets dehorned first. You've got a pretty fair spread yourself. If the lady don't do that kinda dances, it's her lookout, ain't it? You don't need to hoop about it. I noticed you down at Silver Bend at the circus. Now have a little sense," advises Magpie. You pelicans are too danged anxious to show off before the lady. You fellers spill and lead up and down the street ain't gettin' her a place to lay her head, is it? If she only wants to lay her head, begins Chuck, but Muley steps on Chuck's ankle and shoves him aside. Ma'am, I apologizes for my friends. They mean well, but they ain't got no sense. Now, it appears to me that you are lookin' for a place to sleep. It took that idea a long time to appear to you, Muley, says Magpie. Just in what shape did you get this here bright vision? I don't think that Piperock needs any assistance from the Cross J Cow outfit when it comes to housin' our guests. I'll take care of Miss Harrison, why betcha. Can't she get a room at Sam Holt's place, asks Chuck, serious like. Ma Holt, says Magpie, winking at Chuck, Ma Holt says that every room is full. Chuck wiggles his ears at Magpie and then looks over toward the hotel. Then he grins and says, you wait, will ya? I sabe the cure for that. Chuck goes over to the hotel, and in a few minutes him and old Sam comes over to us. Old Sam says, ma'am, we've got a vacancy and can sleep you fine. Chuck grabs her valise, and him and the lady and old Sam beats it for the hotel. Now, what in did Chuck do to cause such a condition, wonders Magpie. Chuck lied, declares Muley. The son of a gun lied, but what did he lie about? Naturally none of us knowed, so we went over to Buck's place and had a drink. We waited around for Chuck, but he didn't show up, so me and Magpie went home. I said home, but it wasn't home anymore. Magpie got dissatisfied right away. Hog pen, says he. Anybody could tell that hogs lived here. Law'd never intended for men to live alone this away. You living alone? I asks. You don't count, Ike. A man like me kinda pines for the soft things of life. Mush. Mush. Nah WW. Always thinkin' of your belly, Ike. A woman don't mean nothin' to you. I don't mean nothin' to her, Magpie, so it's 50-50. Have you gone and fell into love again? Why, you danged old gray-backed pack rat. Age ain't no barrier to happiness, Ike. It ain't kind of you to point out a man's failin's that away. Love knows no barriers. Nor nothin' else, Magpie. Magpie Simpkins is about 6'1.5" in his socks, and he's built on the principle of the thinnest line between 2 points. He's just got hips enough to hold up his cartridge belt if he's careful. His face is long and his mustaches look plumb exhausted from just hanging down past his mouth. His mind is full of odds and ends that never fit into anything. A ordinary man in love can be handled, but Magpie ain't ordinary. Love is quicksand and no help in sight to that hombre. I've herded him past several affairs of the heart, liver, and lungs, but each time the attack is harder. The DTs are a cinch beside what that pelican suffers when the little fat god of love stings him with a poisoned arrow. Mostly always I hangs a extra gun to my belt and fills my pockets with rocks. Listen to reason? Say, that feller's ears don't hear nothin' but love, honor and obey that, and the church bells ringing. I went to bed that night, leaving him sitting on the steps, talking to himself about the gentle touch of a woman's hand. I asked him if he remembered the one what touched him in Great Falls. There wasn't anything gentle about that one, being as she took his watch and $300. That was another case of love at first sight, and then he went blind. As I said before, bad news travels fast. The next day is Sunday, but that ain't no excuse for every puncher from Silver Bend to Yaller Horse to come to Piperock. I don't think that the Cross J bunch went home Saturday night. Sam Holt never sold so many breakfasts before in his life. Some of them hairpant specimens ate 2 or 3 times. Muley Bowles comes back to Buck's place with his belt in his hand, and groans when he tells me that he thinks he got ptomaine poisoning for breakfast. "You done eat 3 orders of ham and eggs," says Hen. "You say ham and eggs to me again and I'll massacre ya, Hen." Magpie comes back from breakfast and acts kinda sad like. After everybody is back from breakfast, old Sam Holt shows up. The bunch kinda crowds around him. "I has to come away," informs Sam. "Ma's goin' to feed the strange lady, and she won't allow nobody in the dinin' room." "Won't allow nobody in the dinin' room," parrots Telescope. "She has her orders," grins Sam. "Only one man is allowed to see her." "One man?" asks Magpie. "Sam, who is that there man?" "Why, Chuck Warner, of course." "Chuck Warner, of course," nods Magpie, like a man talking in his sleep. "Chuck Warner," wheezes Muley. "Of course." "Of course," says Telescope. "Chuck Warner." Then we sets around and looks at each other. "Chuck Warner," says Hen, like he was trying to remember somebody by that name. "Works for the Cross J outfit," says I, kind of handsome hombre. "You must remember him, men." Oh, yeah," nods Telescope, fussing with his gun. "Chuck Warner." Magpie gets up, yawns and walks slow like out of the door. Art Miller kinda saunters out, and then Telescope seems to desire fresh air. Muley kinda groans and starts to get up, but them 3 orders of ham and eggs has sort of depressed him, and he sinks back into his chair. He takes out a piece of paper and a pencil and begins to write. You've got to hand it to Muley when it comes to poetry. In about 15 minutes Magpie, Telescope, and Art drifts back, and the 3 of 'em lines up at the bar. "Here's hopin' he breaks a leg," says Magpie. "Or splits a hoof," adds Art. "Who ya wishin' all such luck to?" asks Hen. "Chuck Warner," says Telescope. "He's Ma Holt wouldn't let us in, but we peeked in the winder and seen Chuck dancin' a war dance for the lady." "I'll dance for her," says Muley. "I'll dance Chuck's scalp for her." "Why won't Mrs. Holt let anybody in?" "She's got her orders," says old Sam. Just then Scenery Sims, the sheriff, comes in. Scenery is a squeaky little runt, and suspicious of everything and everybody. Magpie gets right up, takes Scenery by the arm and leads him outside. "Now," says Telescope, "what kind of a frame-up has Magpie got under his hair?" We hear Scenery say "WW, is that a fact, Magpie?" Magpie nods and jerks his head toward Holt's place. Scenery nods, and they starts for the hotel, with me and Telescope, Art, Muley, Hen, Half-Mile Smith, Dogod Smith, Tellurium Woods, Mighty Jones and Pete Gonnier. Magpie leads Scenery to a window of the dining room, and they both peers in. Scenery looks at Magpie, kinda queer like, and nods his head. Then he tries to go in the door, but it's locked. Mrs. Holt comes to the door and scowls at Scenery. "You can't come in," says she, and starts to shut the door, but Scenery shoves a foot inside and blocks it. "Mrs. Holt," squeaks Scenery, "you're defyin' the law. Actin' that way puts you liable for contempt of court." "Well," says she, kinda dubious like, "mebbe that's so, Scenery. I'll let you in, but the rest of you snake hunters LL have to stay outside." "We boast to superior intelligence, ma'am," says Magpie. In about a minute here comes Chuck Warner with his hands in the air, and behind him marches Scenery with a gun poked into Chuck's back. Chuck looks at us and says, "What's the matter with this fool?" "Head for the jail," squeaks Scenery. "Head for the jail." You're crazy, wails Chuck. All right, squeaks Scenery. We both headed same way. Henrietta Harrison comes to the door, but Mrs. Holt shoves her back inside and shuts the door. Poor Chuck, says Magpie. Poor Chuck. Poor, howls Chuck. I'm going to kill somebody for this. Gettin' violent, Scenery, says Magpie. Don't take a chance. I'll handle him, Magpie. Point for the jail, you scalp dancin' idiot. Chuck took one look at us, and then headed for the jail, with Scenery trottin' along after him. We all went back to the saloon. Pretty soon Scenery comes from the jail, and he's got a beautiful black eye where Chuck walloped him. Scenery is peeved. Old Judge Steele shows up, kinda ponderous like, and Scenery explains the whole thing as far as he knows. Loco parenthesis, says the judge. Reverted to sex. I always knowed there was aboriginal corpus cleese in his arterial system. He is non-compos mentis. Lignum vitae, nods Magpie. Exactly, says the judge. You stated the case, Magpie. Who is the lady in the case? Name's incognito, says Telescope. Incogniti, alias Harrison. Ha, says the judge, serious like. This will need finesse. I shall go over to the hotel and have speech with the maid. I reckon he got in the name of the law, too, but anyway he got in. Me and Muley went out and sat on the sidewalk, when here comes Mrs. Steele and Mrs. Wick Smith. Have you seen anything of the judge? Asks Mrs. Steele. Yeah, nods Muley. He went over to Holt's to see a lady. Oh, says Mrs. Steele, looking at Mrs. Smith. Men, says Mrs. Smith, men are considerable alike, and a judge ain't no different than the rest. That old cormorant, explodes Mrs. Steele. The only difference is he's worse. We've got to unite, says Mrs. Smith. A united front must be showed. Let's go and talk to Mrs. Tilton before testament falls from grace. They toddles up the street, headed for Tilton's place. But Old Testament wasn't home. I reckon he was kinda snooping around, 'cause he comes out from behind Pete Gonier's blacksmith shop and walks up to us. What was them women talkin' about, Brother Ike? He asks. They've gone up to hold a war talk with your wife, Testament. Appears that there's a united conspiracy against the lady what come yesterday. They've gone to warn your wife, I reckon. Love's labor's lost, says Testament, sad like. She don't need warnin'. Where is said lady? Her and Judge Steele are holdin' a conference over in Holt's place. You might go over and add your spiritual presence, Testament, says Muley. I might, nods Testament. I'm sure ready and willin' to pass spiritual advice. A man of spiritual knowledge is always needed. Testament's last words were kind of faint, as he was hittin' the trail to Holt's front door. Pa, says Muley, sad like, Pa wanted me to study for the ministry. Seems like a minister can get into places where a cowpuncher can't. Mrs. Holt met him at the door and let him in. Pretty soon we sees Mrs. Steele, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Gonier, Mrs. Wheeler, and Mrs. Tilton. They comes down the sidewalk toward us. Me and Muley starts to go into the saloon, but Mrs. Tilton yelps at us, Henry Peck, do you know where my husband is? He's given spiritual advice to a lady, says Muley. I suppose Pete Gonnier is measuring her for a pair of horseshoes, says Mrs. Gonnier, mean like. And maybe Wick is trying to sell her a bill of groceries, says Mrs. Smith. I seen Art curryin' his horses, states Mrs. Wheeler. He ain't curried one of 'em since he owned them 4 horses and he greased his boots this mornin'. Here comes Mrs. Holt, says Mrs. Steele. Maybe she brings news. Mrs. Holt was all out of breath, and them women didn't seem inclined to let her get any of it back. Magpie and Telescope comes out of the saloon and moves in close. I hopes to die, gasps Mrs. Holt. I hopes to die. You're got a cinch, says Telescope. We all have to. Them females gives Telescope one gosh awful look, and then surrounds Mrs. Holt, who gasps out her story. She's dancin' for testament and the judge barefooted. No, declares 5 female voices at once. Yes. Her and the judge has a long talk and I heard She tells him that Piperock don't appreciate art. My art? Asks Mrs. Wheeler. I don't know. Lemme talk, will you? The judge said he longed for the day when Piperock would become the greatest place on earth, and he said she had a good start right now. This here female opines that we're 50 years behind the times. She asks him why folks don't wake up around here. The judge says they're just waitin' for the right person to come along and set the alarm. She says she's the greatest dancer in the world. She wants to show off, but the judge says that all Piperock ain't as intelligent as he is and maybe they'd not see things in the right light. Then Testament Tilton comes in. The judge introduces them too, and explains about her being the greatest dancer on earth. Testament Tilton says he's originally from Missouri. Then he laughed like a danged hyena. I don't like to say that about a preacher, but speak your mind, sister, says Mrs. Tilton. I like your description. Well, continues Mrs. Holt, I had to go away for a few minutes, but when I got my eye to the crack of that door again I hears the judge say in testament, I reckon the rest of the country will kinda set up when we lets know that Piperock is going to exhibit the greatest dancer in the whole danged world, Then testament says, Brother Steele, you've said a lot in them few lines. Your idea of givin' this under the auspices of my church is goin' to make a hit with the woman folks. That takes the curse off. Just then this here female shows up barefooted. Mrs. Holt stops for breath. Can she dance? Asks Mrs. Smith, wheezing quite a lot. Well, Mrs. Holt looks around at us, and swallows real hard. Well, Mrs. Smith, I reckon we better go over to your house to tell the rest of it. They went across the street like they was afraid they'd get wet. I'll never eat another meal in Sam Holt's place again, declares Muley. I'll get even with her by boycottin' her husband. I'm goin' home, says I. The peace and quiet of Piperock is about null and void, and I need solitary communion with my pet hunch. Somethin' tells me that all is not well. In fact, somethin' tells me that all is not only not well, but in dang delicate health. Nobody can read Piperock's mind, but I've seen disaster come and go, and my personal prognostications are about on a par with a weatherman prophecy fair and warm in Death Valley. I'm cookin' supper when Magpie shows up, and the blasted idiot is grinning from ear to ear. He pours coffee over his potatoes and puts sugar on his bacon and then begins to talk. The rhythm, says he, the rhythm of nature is a wonderful thing, Ike. Yes, says I, it must be. The breeze of spring, the waving of the branches of a tree. True poetry, Ike. The human form divine is the only thing capable of expressin' these here emotions. I takes out my gun and puts it beside my plate. Magpie, there's a curse on you, and you might as well spill it all now. I'm not interested a danged bit, but any old time you starts out bobbin' from flower to flower I knows what's comin'. Spread your hand. Magpie smiles at me and then shoves back from the table. Ike, here's where we jump 50 years ahead of Paradise and Curlew. We has hung to the old order of things too long. We has become moth-eaten and stale. Don't you know we have? Anything would hung up for 50 years, Magpie. We still dance quadrilles and waltzes, the same of which went out of style with flintlock muskets. Now, we sheds the scales off our eyes and comes out of our shells into the dawn of a brighter day. Piperock entereth the reign of classical dancing, Ike. Miss Harrison is goin' to elevate us, but we have to give her our able assistance. There seems to be a female sentiment against her here, but that's plumb natural, vain as we're in a rut and don't know no better. Judge Steele and Testament Tilton has seen her dance. Them two are real progressive, Ike, and they sees the possibilities. Testament Tilton says it's got anything beat he ever seen, and he's had his eyes open for 66 years. Miss Harrison says she'll teach Piperock the rhythm of motion and then give a show for the benefit of the church. She's gotta have a class of 5 to start with, and after them 5 has learned all about it they can each take a class of 5. See how it's done. Has she picked her class? I picked M for her, Ike. She kinda leans on me. Might better a picked a fishpole. Who'd you pick? Me and Pete and Wick Smith and Art Wheeler and you. I ain't ripe, says I. You better put me back on the tree. She wanted you, Ike. Mentioned you right off the reel. Said she wanted a representative group. Well, I got M, didn't I? Everybody wanted to help, but 5 was all we could use. Is Chuck still in jail? Nope, Chuck's mad. You see, he told Mrs. Holt that him and Miss Harrison was goin' to get married, and he wanted Mrs. Holt to take care of her and see that none of the men came near her. Chuck was showin' her some Injun dances, and it was a good chance to get even with him for lyin' all the time. Mrs. Holt was willin' to take her in, vain as she was to marry Chuck. Testament has talked Mrs. Holt into keepin' her until this here church benefit is over. It's goin' to be a elite affair, I'll tell a man. Nothin' like it has ever been thought about before, Ike. This is one time when Piperock shines as a social center and abolishes her rough career. When it comes to dancing I sure have always shook a wicked hoof, but this kinda stuff had me hoppled. You take 2 or 3 little running steps ahead, stop and wave your arms in the air, and kick out behind like a mule. Then you duck to one side, whirl around, lift up your arms again and go hippity hopping around the place, kinda singing tra-la-la, la, la. That represents a little zephyr of spring, you understand. There was 5 little zephyrs in our spring. We zephyred around and around. Miss Harrison said we was getting the idea. Then she had us zephyr alone, while the other 4 little breezes sat down and made smart remarks. There was considerable feeling aroused during this lesson. 5 little zephyrs took her back to the hotel, and then 1 little zephyr went home and packed up his burro. That 1 little zephyr had a vision of a big blow coming and wanted to get out of the road. Magpie tried to plead with us, but me and the mule remained firm. Magpie's voice was full of tears, but I shook my head, packed my jussack and went to live a while with Dirty Shirt Jones, who lives several miles away from the center of disturbance. Dirty Shirt ain't neither sane nor sanitary, but he appreciates me a heap. Dirty is cockeyed, but he believes in handing you bouquets while you are yet in the land of the living and not waiting until you are ready for your weight of sand. Dirty squints at me and says, I know you'd show up, Ike. It's about time for Piperock to make a fool of itself again. What's itchin' the old town this time? Interpretive dancing. Oh yeah. I don't know what in that is, Ike, but it sounds like Piperock might adopt it. Magpie's the ringleader, ain't he? Sure. Dirty knows Piperock as well as I do. For a week I helped him on a copper prospect, and not a word of Piperock's doings percolated into our happy home. Then Dirty got dry. When dirty shirt gets dry, there ain't nothing short of sudden death will stop him this side of Buck Masterson's place. Therefore we packs our burros and pilgrims to the city of Baal, as Testament calls it, every Sunday. Testament has just got 2 sermons. One is on temperance and the other is on the evils of strong drink. We has to pass Mighty Jones' place on our way in, and we finds Mighty settin' on his wood pile, playing with a coyote pup. He squints at us. Goin' to Piperock. I admits our ultimate destination. Better go home. Testament Tilton says that Piperock is goin' to run a dead heat with Sodom and Gomorrah, whatever pair of horses them two is. What's the matter with Piperock? Asks Dirty. Mighty hitches up his pants and spits very expressive like. High-toned. Yes sir, Piperock is gettin' uppity part of em, and the rest are packin' 2 guns per each. Tonight means trouble in that town, why betcha? Tonight? Why tonight, Mighty? Social affair tonight, that's why. $2 per ticket, and not a gun allowed into the hall. I've got a ticket, which I'll sell ya. Goin' to save my money for cartridges, grunts Dirty, and we pilgrims on. We went right down the street of Piperock, looking neither to the right nor left, and head straight for Magpie's cabin. Looking into the open door we sees Magpie bending over the cook stove, frying meat. "Clahowya," says Dirty. Magpie drops the pen on the floor and whirls with a gun in each hand. "Dancing makes you jumpy?" I asks. Magpie shoves his guns back inside the waistband of his pants, kicks the hunk of meat into the skillet and turns back to the stove. "How's Miss Harrison?" I asks. Magpie turns and squints at me. "She's gone, Ike." "Demised." "Departed." "Kinda busts up the show, don't it, Magpie?" "Like it does." "How comes she to depart that-a-way?" asks Dirty. Magpie flops the meat and sets it on the back of the stove. Then he sets down on a bunk and combs his mustache. "You ain't heard, have ya, Ike?" "No." "Well, here's the how of it all. You left here about the time that all the married women are fawn-chin around, organizin' a vigilance committee to hang their own husbands, didn't ya? Well, Wick and Pete and Old Testament and Art Wheeler and Judge Steele decides that Piperock and posterity needs more than jealous wives do, so they up and orates that for interests of the furtherance of Piperock they're goin' to stick to their original idea of learning the latest thing in dances. Them women combines against such proceedings, and locks their doors against said husbands, with the result that we puts up bunks in the Mint Hall for all them errant husbands. Miss Harrison hangs on to her room at the hotel and Mrs. Holt enlists with the belligerent wives and hives up at Judge Steele's. Inside of 3 days them husbands are plumb anxious to go to their wives, but wifey has nailed the front door shut. Them their dancin' lessons has improved us wonderful, Ike. I gets old Sam Holt to dance in your place. Then we finds out somethin'. Judge Steele goes sneakin' around home late at night after our lessons, and he peeks under the curtains in his house, and he sees Miss Harrison teachin' them women to dance, and the judge swears that they ain't got enough clothes on to flag a handcar. The judge so forgets himself that he raps on the window, and he gets a lot of birdshot sprayed into the seat of his pants. Miss Harrison has double-crossed us, and the next night we chides her about it. She gets kinda woolly and informs us that the ladies invited her to teach them so they could do their part in the performance. She was teachin' 'em the dance of the raindrops. "My," grunts Wick. "My wife ain't no raindrop. I ain't goin' to permit Mrs. Tilton to appear in no mosquito nettin' and bare feet not in public," declares Testament. Things got kinda deadlocked, Ike. The tickets are all sold for the performance, and the church realizes over $200. Me and the judge goes as a committee to confer with Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Tilton, and they refuses to arbitrate. They opines that what's good enough for their husbands is good enough for them. Mrs. Tilton says, if Testament can wear a G-string and imitate a willow tree, why can't I wear a porous knit undershirt and imitate a drop of rain? What could we do? We went back and held a council of war. Pete said he'd be if his wife was goin' to be a spectacle. They all declared that they wasn't goin' to let the world at large gaze upon their property in the rough. Miss Harrison declares that it must go through. There you are, Ike. Miss Harrison was taken to Paradise this morning and was put aboard the train. Art Wheeler drove the stage, and Pete Gonnier, Judge Steele, and Testament Tilton acted as shotgun guards. Our premier dancer has went. Which busts up the show, says Dirty. Not while Magpie Simpkins roams the plains, it don't. Piperock is goin' to get a look at interpretive dancin', why betcha. How much civic pride has you two snake hunters got? Me and Dirty don't say a word, being as we don't sabe his wow wow. Then he hauls out a jug of painkiller and we sets down to do homage. After all danger from drought is a long time past, Magpie points out the duty of a real honest to grandma citizen. He orates openly that the future of a city is only as broad as the inhabitants will allow. He asks Dirty Shirt if his views are narrow. Wide as the ocean, and beggin' to expand, says Dirty. I'm the widest human bein' you ever seen, Magpie. Doggone me if I ain't wider than anythin' anybody ever seen. How about you, Ike? I've got you skinned about 4 ways from the jack, says I, and somehow I believed it. Magpie got in between us and took Dirty's gun away from him. Killin' ain't expansion, explains Magpie. Piperock has entertained too many times in the interests of the Undertaker. Piperock is so far behind the times that the 17th generation of Montana's human race has started and finished and we're still runnin' the wrong way of the track. Are we that far behind the rest of the world, asks Dirty, tearful like. Further, assures Magpie. Then let's be up and doin', urges Dirty. My, I never realized that we was runnin' in the dust. How does we start in to speed up the old buggy? Says Magpie, I am the little jigger who is goin' to lead Piperock to promised land. I am the pelican which is goin' to make Piperock a place of honor and glory and a social center. I has been throwed down by the best citizens, you know it? Puttin' their personal feelin's ahead of the best interests of the city, they has laid down upon their labors, willin' to let poor old Piperock slumber and waller in the dust of decay, but the woman can see what it means to the city, and they're firm as rocks. I have got one of the best dances you ever seen, gents. The ordinary poetry of motion is the weavin's of a drunken Siwash with a sprained ankle beside this here dance of mine. Miss Harrison said it had anythin' beat she ever seen. Do you have music for this kind of dancin', asks Dirty. Well, kinda, assures Magpie. Frenchy Deschajou's harp and Bill Thatcher on his windpipe. Bill bought it a short time ago. Said that every time he got a bull fiddle busted it cost him $10 for a new one, so he buys him a windpipe. If anybody shoots holes in that thing he can patch it up. That's a new instrument on me, says Dirty. That's it, says Magpie. We're so far behind the times, Dirty, that we don't recognize things that the rest of the world has been usin' for years. My, wails Dirty. This is awful, Magpie. I'm grateful to you for callin' my attention to same. Ain't you grateful, Ike? Remains to be seen, as the feller said when he dug into a Injun grave. Ike's grateful, says Magpie. Ike's the gratefulest human bein' on earth. That ain't no ways true, objects Dirty. I'm the most gratefulest. I gets between Magpie and Dirty and makes 'em put up their guns. Then we all took a last look at the inside bottom of the jug of painkiller. Piperock appreciates art, there ain't no question about that. There's fellers in town for this social event that ain't been outside their dugouts since the big blow. Plain and fancy horse thieves, unsuccessful rustlers, hairy old shepherds that says yeah and no oh, just like a sheep, and others too numerous and ornary to mention. Scenery Sims is sitting in front of the mint hall with a sawed-off shotgun on his lap, but he lets us in. How does she look, Scenery? Asks Magpie. Well, squeaks Scenery, everything is alright so far, but them ex-dancers is all back from paradise. The women is all up there in the hall now. Bill Thatcher is drunker and $700, and somebody has hit Frenchie in the mouth and kinda crippled his part of the orchestra. Shouldn't be surprised if there'd be buzzards circlin' Piperock in the mornin'. We went up into the hall, which is all fixed up for the social doings. They've got the stage all curtained off and the room is full of chairs. Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Tilton, Mrs. Gonnier, Mrs. Holt, Mrs. Wheeler, and Mrs. Steele are there. Magpie leads me and Dirty up to the stage and in behind the curtain. My, gasps Dirty. Sheep. There's 4 sheep tied up back there all rams. Sheep yes, agrees Magpie. Them is what Miss Harrison calls atmosphere. Oh, my, gasps Dirty. What's she mean, Magpie? Accessories to my dance, explains Magpie. I'm the star performer in the Shepherd's Awakening. What do we do? Asks Dirty. You fellers are fawns. I'm the old buck dear me, declares Dirty. You're more cockeyed than me, Magpie, if you can see me with 4 spindle legs and a spotted hide. A fawn, says Magpie, a fawn is a thing that looks like a human being, but ain't. It wears skin pants, but from there on up it's plumb nude. On its head is little horns, and it's got a tail like a goat. It plays a tune on a wooden whistle. Me and Dirty looks at each other, kinda foolish like. I think it's lovely of you 2 gentlemen to step in the breach, says Mrs. Tilton. Step in the croaks Dirty, wild-eyed. This is terrible. It will be a big thing for Piperock, says Mrs. Gonnier, and it will teach the male sex that the women are the real progressives. Don't you think so, Mr. Harper? There's goin' to be a lesson taught, says I. Experience is a great teacher, but I ain't never learned much. I thought I was wise, but I finds that well, I ain't never wore a tail like a goat and blowed on a wooden whistle yet. I hope that Testament's skin pants will fit Mr. Harper, says Mrs. Tilton. Mr. Harper is a little wider across than the Reverend. Mr. Jones will be a little snug in Sam's, opines Mrs. Holt, but he don't have to do only one little dance. Dirty Spad Eye rolls a complete circle and then stops with a dead center on the tip of his nose. He grabs me by the arm and flops down in a chair. Ike, he gasps, Ike, shoot me while there is yet time. Shoot yourself, you've got a gun, says I know it, bub, but I'm so nervous I'd miss. Dirty just sits there and sweats. Them sheep, has they been trained? I asks. They been here 2 days, says Magpie. They ought to be used to the stage. Sudden like we hears a crash downstairs, the sound of loud voices raised in anger, and then up the stairs comes Judge Steele, Wick Smith, Pete Gonnier, Art Wheeler, and Sam Holt. They've got Scenery Sims in their clutches, and he's squeaking like a rusty gate. They files into the door, and Magpie greets 'em with a gun in each hand. Come ya in anger? Asks Magpie. Kinda, admits Pete. This wangdoodle tried to stop us. Put your hands up, snaps Magpie, and the whole gang reach upward. Take their guns away, scenery. Now, says Magpie, what's eatin' you backsliders? Ma Whale's testament. You ain't aimin' to carry out your threat, are yet? I'm goin' to dance if that's what you mean, says Mrs. Tilton, mean like. Arabelli, does you mean that you woman begins Wick? Wick Smith, you started this, says Mrs. Smith. You told me I was narrer. You said I was 50 years behind the times, didn't you? That Magpie Simpkins put them words in my mouth, Arabelli. I won't stand for it, yelps Pete. No woman of mine can, Pete, you shut your face, whoops Mrs. Gonnier. If you don't want to see me imitate a raindrop vamoose, I sure am goin' to rattle on the roof. I'll get out a injunction, says Judge Steele. By mighty, I'll declare it a public nuisance. I'll stop this here, you'll set down and keep your face shut, says Magpie. You 5 pelicans are goin' to set right down and look and listen. Has you all got tickets? None of 'em has bought a ticket, and they opines they won't. Scenery, says Magpie, take $2 from each of 'em. Them 5 arose up and yelped like a pack of wolves, but Scenery got $10 out of the bunch, and then we made 'em take front seats. We hears some gosh awful sounds coming up the stairs, and into the door comes Bill Thatcher. He's got one of them Scotch windpipe instruments and it's wailing like a lost soul. Behind him comes Frenchy Deschamps. Neither of 'em are in any shape to make music for anything except a dog fight, but they flops down in their chairs at the front of the stage and acts like they meant business. Scenery recovers his sawed-off shotgun and sets down on the corner of the stage, where he can watch them disgruntled husbands. Me and Dirty follows Magpie to a place he's got partitioned off for a dressing room. Through the curtain we can hear Yallerock County beginning to come in. Me and Dirty are just sober enough to kinda be indifferent to death or taxation. Magpie gives us our costumes, which consists of cowhide pants with a tail tied on, and a jigger made like a cap, with yearling calf horns sticking out the side. He also gives us each a little whistle made of a willer. Where's the shirt? Asks Dirty. Fawns don't wear shirts. What do you wear, Magpie? Magpie holds up a mountain lion skin and a breech clout. Dirty looks things over and then says to Magpie, if you escape, Magpie, will you do me a favor? In my cabin in a old trunk, is a suit of clothes. I paid $16 for it the year Brian run for free silver, but I never wore it. Will you see that they lays me out in it? Lord knows I don't want to be buried in a outfit like this. From outside we hears Foghorn Foster's voice, "Wee-ee-ell, come on, you mockin' birds. The house must be full," opines Magpie, fastening his lion skin. Full of hooch and size Dirty, sliding into his cow skins. I'm goin' to die like a cow, I know that. My gosh, grunts Magpie. I plumb forgot we ain't got no announcer since the judge quit. Ike, will you do the announcin'? Then I won't have to dance. Sure you'll have to dance, but all you've got to do, Ike, is to tell 'em what is comin' next. The first thing on the program is a solo dance, which is known as the Gathering Storm, by Mrs. Smith, and then she gets assisted by the 5 raindrops, consisting of Mrs. Holt, Mrs. Tilton, Mrs. Steele, Mrs. Gonnier, and Mrs. Wheeler. Mrs. Smith is doing the solo in place of the departed champion dancer of the world. Will you do this for me, Ike? Do it for Magpie, urges Dirty. Do anything to get it over. I went onto the stage, and I got the shock of my life. Them females are out there, and I'm a danged liar if they ain't undressed about as much as possible. I takes one look and staggers for the curtain. I hears one of them women bust out in a haw, haw, as I went past, but I never stopped to think that I wasn't wearing any more than the law allows. I steps out through the curtain and looks around. Never did the old hall hold as many folks. Foghorn Foster and Half Mile Smith are settin' in the front row, across the aisle from each other. They stares at me for a moment, then both gets up like they was walking in their sleep, steps for the aisle and bumps together. Foghorn hit Half Mile and Half Mile hit the floor, after which Foghorn went right on up the aisle. Half Mile got up, looks at me again, and follows Foghorn, but he ain't tryin' to catch Foghorn, he's tryin' to go past him. My gasp cinch color, lookin' wild like around. Won't somebody please hold me? I won't be responsible, ladies and gents, says I'm out here to let you know what's comin' off. Wait a minute, says Abe Mudgett, standing up. I've got my two sisters here with me, and if anything more's comin' off, set down, squeaks Scenery, waving his shotgun at Abe, and Abe sets down. Now, says I'm out here to announce that the first thing on the program is Mrs. Smith. She's goin' to imitate a storm comin' up, and then Mrs. Holt, Mrs. Tilton, Mrs. Wheeler, Mrs. Steele, and Mrs. Gonnier are goin' to show you what raindrops look like. This here haw, 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 roars Pete Gonnier, but his laugh don't show that he's tickled so awful much. Haw, haw, haw. Mrs. Smith is goin' to imitate haw, 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 howls Wick. My wife looks as much like a storm as yours does like a raindrop, Pete. My wife, states the judge, standing up, my wife ain't goin' to do no fool thing of the kind. I'll show her. Set down, yelps Scenery. Set down, you old Blackstone bladder. This is once when you don't hand down no decisions. Get off the stage and let rain, howls Telescope Tolliver. I'll see it through if I have to wear a slicker. Ready for us to play, asks Bill Thatcher, kicking Frenchie to wake him up. Use your own judgment, Bill, says I've done all I can, and now I'm goin' to let nature take her course. I starts to step back through the curtain, when Polecat Perkins yells like, I was wrong, you're only half cow. I gets back inside. Them women are all scared plumb stiff, but Mrs. Smith wheezes, ladies, we've made our bluff, let go. Just then Bill Thatcher's instrument begins to wail and wail, shutting off all chances for Frenchie Deschamps to be heard. Sweet Marie, howls Mrs. Smith. Gee cripes, don't he never learn a new tune? I ducks out of sight and the curtain slides back. If Mrs. Smith knew anything about dancing, she forgot every step. She trots out on the stage and starts something like Kid Carson used to call shadow boxing. Then she turns around about 3 times, stubs her toe and falls down. Standing in a line across the stage is the rest of them females, with their hands up in the air like they was being held up by somebody with a gun. Arabalai, wails Wick. My, woman, get out of sight. Mrs. Smith gets to her feet and yelps back at Wick, get out of sight yourself if you don't like it. I'll teach you to flirt with a dancer. Start the music over again, Bill. Lee, shrieks Sam Holt. And Shaw got no modesty? Go put on your shoes and socks. Bill Thatcher starts squealing on his instrument again, and Mrs. Smith starts doing some fancy steps. Wow! Here comes Judge Steele, Art Wheeler, Pete Gonnier, Testament Tilton, Wick Smith, and Sam Holt, climbing right over the top of folks. Gid baack, squeaks Scenery, waving his shotgun. Stop it! Whoa, Blaze! Look at the wild man, howls somebody, and here comes Magpie across the stage hopping high and handsome. Stop Scenery, Whoops magpie. Doggone 'em, they can't bust up my show. Man, I'll tell all my grandchildren this tale. Them outraged husbands came up on that stage, while Rock County yelled itself hoarse and made bets on whether it would be an odd or even number of deaths. Magpie hit Pete in the neck and Pete lit with one leg on each side of Bill Thatcher's head. Wick Smith got hold of his wife and them two started a tug of war. Me and old Sam Holt got to waltzing around and around, which wasn't at all pleasant, being as I'm barefooted and Sam ain't. I seen Mrs. Wheeler and Art locked in mortal combat, and just then I hears Dirty Shirt Jones yelp heavy, heavy hangs over your head. I whirls just in time to see what's coming, but I can't escape. Dirty Shirt has turned the atmosphere loose. Them four he-sheep, four ungentlemanly woolies, with corkscrew horns, are buck-jumping across that stage, seeking what they may hit. I swung around to meet the attack, and I reckon the leading sheep hit him a dead center, 'cause I felt the shock plumb to me. Maybe it hit Sam a little low, because it knocked all four of our feet off the floor, and the next in line picked us in the air and stood us on our heads. I seen Wick Smith, braced against the edge of the stage, trying to pull his wife over the edge, the same of which is an invitation to a sheep, and the old ram accepted right on the spot. Mrs. Smith grunted audibly and shot into Wick's arms. Scenery Sim starts to skip across the stage, but a ram outsmarted him, and I seen Scenery turn over gracefully in the air and shoot, regardless, with both barrels of that sawed-off shotgun. Them load of shot hived up in the chandelier, the same of which cut off our visible supply of light. I heard the crashing of glass, and I figures that the hallway is too crowded for some of the audience. I lays still, being wise, until the noise subsides, and the crowd has escaped. Then I move slowly to my hands and knees. I feels a hand feeling of my legs, and then a hand taps gently on my horned cap. I thought, whispers old Sam's voice kinda quavering like, I thought they was all old ones, but a sheep's a sheep to me. Bam! Something landed on my head, and I seen more bright lights than there is in $1 million worth of skyrockets. Then things kinda clear up, and I hears old Sam saying to himself, well, I killed one of the things. If I go carefully I can dimly see old Sam sneaking for the front of the stage. I'm mad. I got up and sneaked right after him. No man can mistake me for a sheep and get away with it. I jumps for old Sam's back, and just then he seems to kinda drop away from me. I reckon he forgot about the 5 feet drop from the stage, and I know danged well I did. I reckon I sort of lit on my head and shoulders on top of somebody. There comes a squeak from Bill Thatcher's instrument, and then all is quiet. I wriggled loose and starts to get up, but a strong hand grabs me by the ankle, yanks me off my feet, and I hit my head on a chair. I kinda remember being dragged down them stairs, and then I feels my carcass being dragged over rough ground. It was a long, hard trip, and I reckon I lost about all the skin on the upper half of my body. Finally I bumps over a step, gets yanked inside onto a carpet, and then I hears a voice very dimly, sweetheart, I brought thee home. Then a light is lit, and I sees Mrs. Smith putting the chimney on a lamp. Without turning she says, I reckon you'll confine your love to me after this, eh? Then she turns and looks at me, sitting there on the floor with my back propped up against a chair. I looks around. Just inside the door, sitting on the floor, is Wick. Mrs. Smith looks at me and then at him. Then she wipes her lips and stares at Wick. Sweetheart, grunts Wick, getting to his feet. Arabelli, ain't you got no shame? Dancin' up there without nothing on to speak of, and then you has the gall to bring your sweetheart home with ya. Didn't I bring you home, Wixie? You know danged well you didn't. I always knowed you was kinda sweet on Ike Harper. On that. She actually yelped, and pointed her finger at me. Sweet on him. I gets to my feet, but my legs ain't very strong. I says, lemme alone. I don't want no man's wife's love, especially one what hauls me home by the ankle. When I get married I want a clingin' vine, not a pile driver. I never did have much sense. A feller in my condition ought to keep his mouth shut and sneak away soft like. I turns my head toward the door, and just then the weight of the world hit me from behind, and it was a lucky thing for that house that the door was open. I landed on my hands and knees in the yard, with all the wind knocked out of my system. Wick has got some rose bushes in his yard. Like a animal wounded unto death, I reckon I tried to crawl around on my hands and knees to find a spot to die in. All to once I sees one of them sheep. It's only a short distance from me. I know if I move it's going to hit me sure as, so I remain still. I'll bet that me and the sheep never moved a muscle for 15 minutes. Then all at once the sheep spoke. For S sake, if you're goin' to butt and have it over with. I got to my feet. Get up, Dirty Shirt Jones, says I. What kind of a way is that to act? Dirty weaves to his feet and stumbles over to me. Ike, thank the Lord, we're alive. Don't presume too much. Medical science says that a man can live after losing a certain amount of skin, but I'm bettin' I've passed that certain limit. Let's sneak home and save what life we've got left. We sneaked around the Mint Hall and Wick's store, and at the corner we stumbles into somebody. Who goes there? Asks Dirty. Go, wails Magpie Simpkins. Help me, will ya? I wrastled all the way down here with one of them sheep and now I'm afraid to let loose. You and your atmosphere, groans Dirty. I'm settin' on it, wails Magpie, I've got a kink in my neck. Will ya hold it down until I can get up? Just then a voice from under him starts singing very soft and low. There's a land that is fairer than this. Magpie gets to his feet and takes a deep breath. Testament, says he, what made you blad like a sheep? But Testament's mind is not dwelling on sheep, not the kind of sheep that Magpie meant. Then the three of us starts limping toward home. Mebbe, says Magpie, kinda painful like, mebbe we progressed too fast. Piperock don't appreciate it, gents, but this night the old town jumped ahead at least 50 years. Jumpin', says Dirty, reflective like, jumpin' don't hurt nobody, but, holy henhawks, it sure does hurt to jump that far and light so hard. We pilgrims along, everybody trying hard to make their legs track. Finally Magpie says, personally, I think that interpretive dancin' has anythin' skinned I ever seen. Me too, says I, and parts I never have seen. Transcriber's note, this story appeared in the April 30, 1922 issue of Adventure magazine. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook. Too much progress for Piperock. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start. Full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works 1.a. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLOF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying, or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e. Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg, 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2 If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3 If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4 Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark. 1.e.5 Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark license. 1.e.6 You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7 Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8 You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works provided that, you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f1.f.1. Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects, such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2. Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs, and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph 1.f.3. You agree that the Foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive, or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.f.3. Limited right of replacement or refund. If you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1.f.4. Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.f.3, this work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.f.5. Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.f.6. Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the Foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion, and distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs, and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur. A. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg trademark work. B. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg trademark work, and C. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg trademark. Project Gutenberg trademark is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers, including obsolete, old, middle-aged, and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need are critical to reaching Project Gutenberg trademark's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg trademark collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg trademark and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a nonprofit 501(c)(3) educational corporation organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's IN or Federal Tax Identification Number is 64-6221541. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, Utah 841-16801-596-1887. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact. Section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg trademark depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment, including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork, and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways, including checks, online payments, and credit card donations. To donate, Please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg Trademark Electronic Works. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg trademark concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg trademark ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the US unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg trademark, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks. Too much progress for Piperock, the full Project Gutenberg license.